There comes a point that most people will never speak about openly. A point where you find yourself parked outside, engine silent, staring at a building filled with memories, and something inside you knows with absolute certainty that you cannot enter that space again. Not from hatred, not from anger, but because continuing to walk through that door would mean losing the last pieces of yourself that remain intact. Cutting contact with family represents one of society's most condemned decisions. It contradicts every message we've absorbed since childhood. Family bonds are permanent. Parents deserve unconditional loyalty. Blood connections supersede everything else. Within our culture, maintaining family relationships is treated almost as a sacred obligation, which makes the choice to disconnect feel less like a personal decision and more like committing an unforgivable act. Yet, current research suggests that more than 1 in 4 adults in this country have completely disconnected from at least one family member. These are millions of individuals who reached a point where they acknowledged, often after years of internal struggle, that their well-being could not coexist with certain familial bonds. Perhaps the more significant question isn't about their reasons for leaving, but rather what level of psychological damage makes such a socially forbidden choice the only viable option for survival. This exploration examines the actual psychological mechanisms behind family disconnection, the behavioral patterns, the emotional injuries, and the realities that many families never acknowledge. For anyone questioning their own experience with family dynamics, this analysis will provide clarity, language for your feelings, and validation that may have been consistently denied. Family disconnection doesn't manifest through a single catastrophic event. It develops through accumulated quietness, through countless small moments that others never witness. There's a common misconception that family separations result from dramatic confrontations, explosive holiday arguments, ideological disagreements, or forgotten important occasions. But examining actual cases reveals that the final trigger is rarely the most significant event. It's simply the last addition to a burden that has been growing progressively heavier across many years. This process unfolds as a gradual deterioration, a psychological wearing down that continues across decades. It starts with interactions, so seemingly insignificant that you barely acknowledge them consciously. The subtly belittling remarks, the invasive questioning framed as concern, the emotional invalidation disguised as guidance. Each individual instance appears relatively harmless, but collectively, they create an environment of persistent psychological stress. You develop coping mechanisms. You learn to minimize your authentic self. You learn to ignore the tension that builds in your body each time you hear their voice. This phenomenon represents what mental health professionals describe as cumulative trauma. It's not a single devastating blow that causes the damage. It's the relentless repetition, and eventually, something unremarkable occurs. An offhand comment, a violated boundary, a moment of casual disrespect that feels almost scripted in its familiarity. But this time, something inside you recognizes a truth you can no longer ignore. This pattern cannot continue. Not because this particular moment was uniquely terrible, but because you have fundamentally changed. By the time family disconnection becomes visible to outsiders, the underlying reality is straightforward. The relationship has been deteriorating silently for years. The final separation is merely the part that others choose to acknowledge. Within functional family structures, there exists breathing room, emotional, psychological, and relational space between generations. Space to develop different perspectives, space to experience different emotions, space to emerge as an autonomous individual. But in psychologically merged families, this essential space simply cannot exist. Enmeshment doesn't announce itself loudly. It lacks obvious drama. From external observation, it doesn't resemble abuse. Instead, it manifests as being held so intensely that independent breathing becomes impossible. It appears as a parent declaring, "I understand you more completely than you understand yourself," or stating, "If your love was genuine, you would comply with this." It represents the dissolution of healthy boundaries, the psychological fusion of two distinct identities into a single entity. Your emotional states become their emotional states. Your decisions become their domain. Your existence becomes an extension of theirs. And here's the invisible damage. When you attempt to establish even minor separation, completely normal developmental steps, it provokes either panic or rage in the parent. Pursuing a different career path feels like personal betrayal to them. Establishing a boundary feels like profound disrespect. Maintaining private thoughts feels like abandonment. Family systems researchers identify this as differentiation failure, the inability to maintain connection without losing individual identity. In enmeshed households, connection demands the sacrifice of autonomy. Over extended time, the child internalizes a profoundly damaging conclusion. Maintaining this relationship and maintaining authentic selfhood are mutually exclusive options. This realization often marks the initial quiet movement toward disconnection, long before the concept of no contact consciously forms. Before anyone implements complete disconnection, there almost always exists a lengthy, invisible history of attempting to repair the relationship. Carefully worded conversations, thoughtfully composed messages, apologies offered for situations that weren't your fault. Most adult children don't disconnect without exhaustive efforts. They disconnect because those efforts produce no lasting change. Mental health professionals identify this as the reconciliation loop, a pattern of hope, followed by difficult conversation, followed by temporary improvement, followed by regression back to harmful patterns, followed by renewed hurt. This cycle typically repeats numerous times, sometimes spanning multiple decades. You communicate calmly and clearly about how specific behaviors affect you. Momentarily, they appear to comprehend. They might offer an apology, or at least demonstrate temporary gentleness. And then, with almost predictable reliability, everything reverts. The identical criticism reemerges. The same boundary gets violated. The identical emotional injuries reopen as though the conversation never occurred. Attempting therapy with the parent rarely produces results either, not because therapeutic intervention is inherently ineffective, but because emotionally underdeveloped parents often approach it as performance. They behave appropriately within the session. Then they reconstruct the narrative afterward to support their existing perspective. The therapist validated my position. Your perspective was exaggerated. Eventually, the adult child arrives at a painful understanding. No conversation exists, regardless of tone, word choice, or emotional investment, that will make them genuinely hear you. No approach gentle enough, no script careful enough, no demonstration of love sufficient enough to produce authentic change. And when reconciliation attempts fail repeatedly, distance begins appearing, less like abandonment and more like necessary self-preservation. If leaving a psychologically harmful parent were purely a logical decision, most disconnections would occur during childhood. But they don't. They frequently occur when someone reaches their 30s, 40s, even 50s, because the bond connecting a child to an unhealthy parent isn't based on logic. It's rooted in biology. It's survival-based. Trauma bonding develops when love and fear originate from the identical source, when comfort and pain arrive through the same voice, when the parent who causes harm is simultaneously the parent you must depend upon for safety. This creates an intense neurological pattern. Moments of affection trigger dopamine. Moments of fear trigger cortisol, and your nervous system becomes conditioned to this cycle, not because it produces pleasure, but because it produces familiarity. To survive within this emotional turbulence, many children construct what the psychologists term a false self, a carefully crafted version of themselves designed to maintain peace. The compliant child, the agreeable one, the family problem solver, the caretaker, the household's unofficial therapist. Some children undergo parentification, shouldering adult responsibilities long before their development can support such weight. They become the emotional processor, the crisis manager, the person who absorbs the household chaos so others can maintain function. And when a child receives praise exclusively for serving the parent's needs, their authentic identity begins vanishing. But reaching adulthood has a way of exposing these patterns. A healthy romantic relationship. Becoming a parent yourself. A therapist's probing question. A single moment of complete exhaustion, and suddenly the false self begins fragmenting. You find yourself questioning Who am I separate from their needs? Why do I experience such persistent anxiety around people who claim to love me? Leaving requires decades, not because the harm isn't evident, but because the attachment extends deeper than the injury. And severing that bond feels equivalent to removing a part of your own history, your own identity, your own formative years. Yet for many, it represents the only path to finally experiencing genuine freedom. For most people, establishing a boundary functions simply. You state, "Please don't communicate with me that way," and the other person modifies their behavior. But within toxic or emotionally immature family systems, a boundary doesn't register as a request. It registers as an assault. This involves what's called narcissistic injury, a profound, sudden wound a parent experiences when their child suggests they possess any imperfection. A psychologically healthy parent can engage in self-reflection. A wounded parent cannot. They don't hear your actual words. They hear what their fragile ego interprets. You're inadequate as a mother. You failed as a father. You're the problem. And because that interpretation feels unbearable, they respond with a predictable defensive sequence known as Darvo, deny, that never happened, attack. You're overly sensitive. You distort everything. Reverse victim and defender. After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is how you respond? At this point, genuine communication becomes impossible. You're attempting to address a relationship issue. They're attempting to protect a fragile self-concept. You're speaking from experienced reality. They're speaking from emotional injury. A straightforward, healthy boundary like, "Please don't raise your voice at me," transforms into a confrontation. A moment intended to create safety evolves into a conflict you never intended to initiate. Over extended time, the adult child learns an exhausting reality. No amount of careful communication, no tone sufficiently gentle, no script sufficiently perfect exists to make a wounded parent interpret a boundary as anything except betrayal. And this realization often marks where thoughts of disconnection first emerge. If you examine online communities for estranged parents, you'll encounter the same statement repeated constantly. "I have absolutely no understanding of why my child Cutt contact Maureen." But when you hear from the adult children, their accounts tell a completely different story. "I wrote them a detailed 10-page letter. We had multiple extended conversations. We attended therapy together for an entire year." So why do so many parents insist they receive no explanation? Mental health professionals identify this phenomenon as the missing reasons, not because explanations were never provided, but because the parent's psychology refuses to retain them. When an adult child states, "Your behavior caused me harm," those words don't enter a neutral space. They collide with the parent's identity. "I am a good mother. I am a loving father." Anything threatening that identity creates unbearable cognitive dissonance. To resolve that psychological discomfort, the mind performs a form of emotional erasure, not a conscious fabrication, but a subconscious rewriting. This erasure manifests in three common forms. First, distortion, reshaping the narrative until it no longer resembles actual events. Second, minimization. The situation wasn't that severe. You're overreacting. Third, projection. Your partner manipulated you against me. The parent retains memory of the emotional tone, not the content. They remember tears, but not their cause. They remember the confrontation, but not the years of accumulated pain that preceded it. And when the adult child finally chooses distance, the parent's mind completes the final loop. They left without reason. It becomes the ultimate invalidation, the final evidence that reconciliation is impossible. Before anyone implements complete disconnection, they almost always exist within something far more subtle, an emotional prison constructed from fear, obligation, and guilt. Psychologists call it fog, and it explains why so many adults remain in toxic family systems, decades longer than they desire. Fear forms the first constraint, not necessarily fear of physical violence, though that occurs too, but fear of emotional consequences, fear of public shaming, fear of punishment through silence, anger, or humiliation. In many households, love operates conditionally and approval functions as a weapon. You learn early that deviating from expectations means losing safety. Then comes obligation, the belief that you owe your parents absolute loyalty simply because they provided for you. Within our culture, this obligation is treated almost as a moral debt. After everything I sacrificed for you, it doesn't matter how unhealthy the dynamic is. You're expected to remain, to serve, to comply. But the heaviest constraint is guilt, because guilt doesn't just control your actions, it controls your identity. It whispers, you're self-centered, you're ungrateful. Good children don't walk away. And when a parent employs guilt as a control mechanism, the child stops trusting their own emotional reality. Fog maintains people trapped long after the relationship has become harmful. It convinces you that leaving makes you monstrous and staying makes you virtuous. But the truth is simpler and more difficult. Fog isn't love, it's control rendered invisible. And recognizing it often marks the moment the prison door begins opening. When someone implements no contact, outside observers imagine freedom, a clean separation, a dramatic escape, a fresh beginning. But the reality is far quieter and far heavier. The aftermath often begins with a grief that lacks proper terminology. Not the grief of death, there's no funeral, no rituals, no community bringing casseroles to your door. This is ambiguous loss, a form of mourning where the person remains alive, yet the relationship does not. You grieve two losses simultaneously, the parent you had and the parent you needed but never received. This grief carries complexity because it holds guilt, relief, sadness, and clarity all at once. One moment you feel liberated, the next you feel like the most terrible child imaginable. Healing begins with accepting that both experiences can coexist. But something else occurs, something most people don't anticipate. Your physical body begins transforming. For many survivors of toxic family systems, the nervous system has existed in subtle hypervigilance for years. And when the stress source is removed, the body responds before conscious awareness catches up. Your shoulders release tension. Your breathing deepens. You sleep more soundly than you have in a decade. Chronic stomach problems disappear. The persistent tightness in your chest loosens. This is somatic relief, the nervous system finally exhaling after a lifetime of bracing. And within that space, something new begins, reparenting the self. Reparenting isn't about assigning blame to your parents. It's about learning to provide yourself what was absent. Validation without conditions, boundaries without punishment, love without fear. It looks like saying, I'm permitted to feel this, practicing self-compassion during moments of self-judgment, choosing rest without guilt, surrounding yourself with people who don't require you to disappear in order to be loved. Eventually, you start reconstructing an identity not shaped by fear or obligation, but by authentic choice. You discover your preferences, your voice, your emotional landscape, pieces of yourself that were buried beneath survival mode. The paradox is this: disconnection breaks your heart before it sets you free. But the freedom, once it arrives, is genuine. It becomes the foundation where a new, healthier version of you can finally develop. The truth about family disconnection is this: you don't walk away to inflict punishment on anyone. You walk away because your fundamental well-being cannot survive inside a relationship that refuses to evolve. No contact isn't the absence of love. It's the refusal to continue sacrificing yourself in its name. It's choosing reality over denial, peace over chaos, a future over an unhealed wound. And yet many who take this step carry a persistent question. Does this make me the villain? But choosing yourself is not cruelty. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. Healing is not ingratitude. Sometimes the bravest action a person can take is to stop, abandoning themselves for the sake of preserving a narrative that was never accurate. So if you're on this journey or quietly considering it, remember this: you are not alone. You are not heartless. You are someone who finally decided that your life deserves safety, dignity, and something beyond mere survival. There is a meaningful life on the other side of guilt, a life where you are allowed to exist without fear. If this exploration helped you feel understood, I hope you'll continue with us. Subscribe for more psychology insights, healing conversations, and the truths we aren't taught to discuss openly. And if you feel safe doing so, share your experience in the comments. Someone out there might need your voice to feel a little less isolated. Thank you for being here.